Hello, everyone. Here is Tatiana Bazzichelli, the director of the Disruption Network Club, and together with me there is my colleague
Elena Veljanovska.
I'm very happy now to announce our conference number 28, Madness, Fighting for Justice in Mental Health. We are live from the Kunstquartier Bethanien, and also we are on streaming for the people that are following us, not in Berlin. And I want to say that as a team, we are very proud not only to see a full room, but also to say that this conference started a long time ago. We conceptualized it in 2016, and we started to work already on this topic for a long time, and we were looking for funding. It was not an easy path, also because of this topic, I have to say, because they're not easy topics as well. And so we are very happy and also grateful that we finally can make it happen. I want to say that the genesis of this conference was also very interesting. Because I got in contact in 2016 with the Torino Med Pride. That is a very interesting parade that happens every year in the city of Turin in Italy. And is a parade that wants to fight for justice for people that are labeled having mental illness, and at the same time they are trying also to question what mental illness is and try to fight for the civil rights of the people that are labeled as meds. And of course, this is a provocatory title of this conference and also of the parade. But we wanted to focus exactly also on this specific topic because we want to question it, we want to criticize it, and we want also to understand how the healthcare in the context of mental health is working. Also wanted to mention that the Torino Med Pride was funded by Simone Sandretti that passed away in 2016, and he was also a person that wanted to fight for the people that are labeled with mental disorder, and also about the involuntary patient treatments that still often is applied in cases that should not be applied. And I'm very proud to say that this conference this time is not curated by me, but by my colleague Elena Veljanovska, that did very great and enormous work to put this conference together. So now I will leave the word to her that will introduce the rest, and also thanks again to all the audience and the speakers that are here, and the word is yours, Elena.
Thank you, Tatiana. So yeah, first, thank you for offering this topic to me. And thanks for the trust, because I know how much this means to you. I will go to the topic a little bit, I will go back a little bit later, but as I said, it was a topic that is quite important for me, and I accepted this invitation really with, open heart. But before I start, as we know, these things are not happening just out of thin air. I would like to thank the team that is behind the organization. So big thanks goes first to Özlem Kaya and Nada Bakar for the production. Nada Bakar again, who is also doing the community program. Lauren De Carli, legal advisor and admin officer. Jonas Franki, who everyone is asking us, doing the design of the lab. Agnese Trocchi about the digital communication. Alice Bazzichelli, communication assistant. Bureau Doring for the press and streaming and video editing. Bowling Head Media, Rana Fadikari and the team. I want to say one special thanks to a couple of people beside my team. Each one of them has been a great listener, and with their criticism and suggestion, they really helped me navigate the topic and strengthen the focus. So one big thank goes to also Venka Simovska, Julian Schwartz, Marcello Lusana, Gaia Novati, and Jasna Russo. A massive thanks to everyone. Yeah, this has been really taking a lot of thoughts. What to say shortly about the conference, because after so many months of working, yeah, it's hard to sum it up in one short sentence, but also we have 3 days to expand it. For me, just to say in the beginning, it was very interesting topic, but also very challenging. On one hand, because it's a very personal topic, because the whole issue of mental illness, or however we will name it later in the conference, it's very close to me. But then another part is that as a curator, also I had to navigate a topic that I know pretty much from inside as a problem, but then I don't have an expertise. So in this respect, a lot of decisions were made also with consultancy with a lot of people, which was really great at the end to see how also the participants within the conference were proposing, criticizing, and improving the topic at the very end. So shortly, the history of madness has been one of suffering, oppression, and injustice. So what do we think? What do we think of when we speak about just mental health care? The more I was thinking about it, the more complicated the answer becomes. So I will not even try to answer it. So apart from the personal reasons, also the work at the lab, we are really focusing often with, we are dealing with people who are going through different struggles. And so far we have heard a lot of sobering stories and injustices that are driving you literally mad as a listener. So we work with people that are marginalized, people who are constantly resisting the status quo and fight for what they think is just. So this is, for example, with the whistleblowers or many other marginalized groups. So last but not the least was the pandemic, and this is also when we decided the toll that it was taking on people that finally this year we want to really address this topic. So yeah, I will just end with this, even though the driving word of the conference is madness. The focus of this conference is not to define madness, but rather to think of what is driving people mad. The focus is put on thinking of justice and human rights and on the conversations that put the people affected in their rights and dignity at the center of the discussion. So at this point, I would also like to thank all the speakers who came all the way to be with us in these 2-3 days. To thank to the audience for coming really on time today, and also to thank to our online audience. And remember that also you're part of the conversation. Follow us on chat and ask questions. We will be picking them at the end of the each panel. So another important part is the funders and cooperation partners without whom we cannot make this happen. So in short, the conference is funded by the Senat Department for Culture in Europe, the Reva and David Logan Foundation, Kulturgemeinschaften, part of the German Federal Cultural Foundation, German Government Commissioner for Culture and the Media, as part of the Neustart Kultur, a program of the cultural and media sector. And we are doing this conference in cooperation with Global Voices and collaboration with Pop-Up Institute Berlin, and some other partner venues like this one here, Bethanien, Superlab, and Akut Macht Neu. Our outreach partners are Axioma, Institute for Contemporary Art Ljubljana, and media partners Taz, Ilmite, and Ex-Berliner. So here I want to now go briefly about the two-day program that we will have. So today we have the coming panel, Madness and Systemic Oppression. And after the break, we have the decolonizing psychiatry, mental health in conflict zones. And tomorrow, it's not only panels, so we will have a different content. We will have a performance, another keynote, state violence and mental health, screening of a movie Faces of an Exhibition, and the panel Art and Survivor Empowerment. And here at this point, I would also like to invite my colleague Nada to tell us a little bit about the third day.
Thank you, Elena. Is it working? Yes. I'm Nada Bakr, and as Elena mentioned, we work together on this conference, and I'm organizing the community program at the Disruption Lab. So before we go to the Sunday program, I would like to mention that we kicked off this program a little bit early in October, where we had a workshop with the title of Dismantle Sanism, Creating a Utopia in Therapy and Science, with the Pop-Up Institute, who have also worked on the Faces of an Exhibition, and they will be also here with us in the conference. So I would like to thank them for opening up the program with us in October. And in November, we also organized a workshop, Magic at the Margins, Rethinking Healing from a Queer Exile Perspective, with Ahmed Awadallah, which was talking about community knowledge in respect to queer mental health. So we usually also, that's a reason maybe to follow us a bit earlier, because we usually have the meetups and workshop ahead of the community and the conference program. And this will take us after the 2 days of the conference to the 2 workshops on Sunday. Also with Olga and Marcello, who will be with us tomorrow doing the performance, and Marcello will be on the panel. On Sunday, we will get deeper into the work on Sentiera project, which is an Italian word that mix together like healing and feeling are bond together. I'm reading the translation. Sentiera is an interdisciplinary project where it works on mixing senses, and on Sunday we will have the chance to talk about embodiment of exclusion, to address the problem of social isolation and common experiences for people discovering mental health through the Sentiera program. Unfortunately, we're sold out for this workshop way earlier, and we have such a long waiting list. So maybe some people will manage to get them in last minute, but otherwise maybe we try to do it again. After that, we have the trauma-informed design, understanding digital mental health and healing, with Hara Hussein from Shine Project. And Hara's visiting us from the UK, where she has worked with Shine for 10 years to provide support for survivors of abuse through a multilingual, feminist, decolonial, healing-centered practice online platform. There are some spots, and I might open a little bit more because we also have a waiting list. So, so join us for this workshop. I'm happy to see everyone who already registered. And that would be it for the ending of our program with the community part.
Thank you, Nada.
And thank you so much, Elena. We've worked together a long time, and then we came to curate this program together, and it was absolutely a pleasure to work with someone who knows your thoughts and also holds you through it. So wanted to thank you publicly for that.
Wow. Thanks so much.
So now I leave you to continue.
Still stay on the stage now. I'm not leaving the stage now for some time. So this is one last thing. Before we jump into the first panel, even though we have funding, we are really fighting for constant support, and constantly it's a battle every year to produce our program the way we want it. So now we would see something new. It's our membership card, which could be something that one can get now, give it as a present, or there are many ways in which this card can be used. But the idea is that with at least, let's say, €50 to start, you get 1 year of access to all our events, half price for your friends, early invites, our love, which is also very important, and a shiny golden card. So you can find more about it on our website or at the desk. The colleagues will explain it to you. So now, I don't want to keep you longer. I would like to invite on stage Jasna Russo, independent researcher and consultant, and Colin King, teacher, lecturer, and researcher. Please. So I'm changing my role and my mic. First, it's a pleasure to have you both here. I know it's been a ride for both of you, but it makes me very happy to just open the conference with this panel. So I will just give a very short intro from the little text, but then I'm not also going to limit the speakers with my introduction. So yes, I think we will start with the core topic, core question of this conference in this panel. What is madness and who has the right to tell its story? So I really know that with Jasna and Colin, we will be able to introduce the complexity of the conference topic by viewing the multifaceted stories of madness as a social construct, as a historical development, and as a system of oppression. So with both of them, I know that we will get an insight into the theory and practice, but also to talk about the efforts to organize and protest. So I really don't want to go too much into details, but I just want to say at the end that the two of you are really important in having the discussion about giving voice to all these movements. So I would like to just introduce shortly Jasna, who will be our first speaker tonight. So as I said, Jasna is an independent researcher and consultant, also a long-term activist in the International Mental Health Care Service user psychiatric survivor movement. For more than 20 years, she has worked on both survivor-controlled and collaborative research projects, including international large-scale studies. Her articles have been published in anthologies and education journals in Germany and the UK, and she has been visiting professor at 2 higher education institutions in Germany. Apart from this, Jasna has a lot of other publishing activities and that are not summarizable very easily in one bio. So I will just give the word to you first, and then we can discuss further.
Good evening, and thanks to all of you here and to the people who are taking part online. My very special thanks goes to Elena, who invited me to this panel, and to her colleagues who took care of everything. Besides the cool organizer's name, Disruption Network Lab, what I appreciate about this conference is that it addresses the general public and takes place at this communal venue. This is unusual, as the topic of madness and its treatment is mostly discussed in separate, closed spaces, meaning either among mental health professionals or within the organizations of those who are being or have been treated by them. And even though I'm all in favor of disrupting this tradition and making these topics public, I realized while preparing for this panel how challenging it is to speak about madness and psychiatry to those lucky enough not to have encountered any of that, or at least not yet. Okay. Peter Campbell, a long-term activist from the UK who passed away earlier this year, wrote about the difficulty or even the impossibility of communicating the experience of being detained in a psychiatric institution. He wrote, "What we are experiencing is a hierarchy of disempowerments that stretches from the psychiatrist's consulting room to the queue for bread and jam at bedtime. It is interlinked and greater than the sum of its parts. In the end, it is sustained by our own suspicions that we are truly inferior. We come out of these isolating places and we are much too afraid to tell ordinary people what it was like." I would add that even when we emancipate ourselves from the self-image that the treatment leaves us with and overcome the fear of speaking up, even as some of us remake ourselves into survivors of psychiatry, what still remains is the question of how. How are we to sensibly and coherently communicate such an overwhelming experience? Here I mean both the build-up of life experiences that preceded psychiatric treatment and the process by which the accumulation of those experiences becomes mental illness and then patienthood. In order to be able to tell our truths, we first need to understand what happened. We need to find our own explanations, make meaning, and integrate the experience of psychiatrization. This takes time. And then, what words are we to use to break silence and shame when all we have is clinical language on the one side and the lay language on the other, both heavily burdened and fearsome? Each of us navigates that restricted and contested territory as best we can, according to our own sense of right and wrong. Personally, I prefer lay language to clinical, but I don't use mad as an attribute of people or groups of people, and don't think that madness as an experience that anybody can have legitimizes the imposition of a static, lifelong identity upon a person. The experience itself is as complex as any other, with many layers and a multitude of meanings. In the words of Canadian author and activist Eric Fabris, the word madness unlocks my story like a key or locks it up like a safe. So, rather than suggesting any clever general explanation of madness, I think it is far more important to focus on what gets labeled as illness or disorder, to look at the institutionalized roots of othering, categorizing, and medicating human experience, as well as the real-life implications of entering that machinery. To me, mad signifies the social place of the othered, a place to think and talk back from, until that place dissolves and madness, with all its intersections, returns to the spectrum of human experiences from which it has been systematically expelled. Only then might we be able to talk about madness without talking about psychiatry, or with just a historical reference to psychiatry as one of many oppressive systems that have been abolished. If this sounds utopian, we might want to remember that that system was not always there. The notion of the mentally ill, who are unlike the rest of us, actually started with the establishment of psychiatry, first as a form of treatment, and then as a specialized medical discipline. One of the many paradoxes of modern psychiatry is that it now advocates for the social inclusion of the mentally ill, as if it had nothing to do with the ongoing making of the mentally ill in the first place. I think it is obvious by now that, to me, systemic oppression in relation to madness equals psychiatry. And even though I'm well aware that every system of oppression operates not in isolation, but always in synergy with other oppressive structures of our lives, I'd like us to take a closer look at the particular role of psychiatry in upholding and reproducing those structures. I will begin by describing psychiatry's social mandate and scientific claims. Then I will turn to the political organizing of psychiatrized people ourselves and to the potential of our collective knowledge. It is impossible to present the history of psychiatry in this short time, so I will just remind you of its beginnings in order to highlight the continuities and central features that haven't changed since. No clear information can be found about the first mental institution, as several countries are competing in this regard. However, public asylums for the insane first appeared in the 18th century as places to confine people who were seen as a disturbance or danger. This included poor people, prostitutes, vagabonds, people who committed petty crimes, etc. The idea that these people need treatment marks the dawn of psychiatry. It's true that both the places of detention and treatment methods look rather different today and vary according to diverse socioeconomic contexts and unequal distribution of capital. What hasn't changed, though, is psychiatry's clear mandate to maintain social order. A lot has been written on this. I will just quote Canadian author Amal Joseph. He says, "Post-coloniality demands that one interrogates the projects of cataloging people by differentiated type based on luck, that holding positions of superiority over others by professing to know the other and what is required for their cure through the application of moralizing and civilizing therapies is by design a dehumanizing technology historically developed for the purposes of enforcing a human social order." Psychiatry has provided scientific, in inverted commas, justification for injustices ranging from American slavery and the mass murder of lives unworthy of life in Nazi Germany, to the more recent diagnosing and treatment of homosexuality and gender nonconformity. These practices are now things of the past, but not because psychiatry ever stopped serving those in power. The social order changes, but what remains unaltered is psychiatry's role in medically and ideologically justifying and upholding it. So what is psychiatry doing today? In the Western world, we don't have big asylums anymore. Instead, we have a whole psychiatric industrial complex underpinned by special laws to confine and control the mentally ill on the one side, and the powerful pharmaceutical industry on the other. The biomedical theory of mental illness has become one of the world's ruling ideologies. Not only does this theory shape public opinion and organized social responses to madness, it also rules the official knowledge production and training in this field, as well as neighboring professions and disciplines such as psychology, social work, and nursing. The extension of forced psychiatric treatment into the community means that the walls of institutions are not needed anymore. Instead, people can be subjected to community treatment orders, whereby a person can be chemically confined within their own body and mind. Considerable research demonstrates how one's social location determines the diagnosis and the treatment that they are likely to receive once they come in contact with the so-called mental health care system. I think that Colin will say more about that. But as Germany doesn't even provide such statistics, I will point to the official data from England for 2021. Black people are almost 5 times as likely as white people to be detained under the Mental Health Act. And community treatment orders are imposed on Black or Black British people more than 10 times as often as on white people. These numbers speak for themselves, raising the question, what is scientific or medical about psychiatric intervention? A lot has been written about psychiatry's lack of a scientific underpinning, including by psychiatrists themselves. And yet, most people have no idea that despite the millions spent on clinical and genetic research, no biological basis has thus far been established for any psychiatric disorder. I do not mean to say that people do not experience a variety of emotional crises or extreme states of mind, or even abandon consensus reality and enter their own worlds. I simply want to highlight that there is not even one single biomarker to prove that these experiences have any physiological basis. Here I've wrote what biomarker is, if somebody doesn't know. Still, psychiatric interventions target our bodies and brains, and not our lives, where madness comes from. Psychiatric diagnoses are not based on any replicable medical test. Rather, they are best owed on the basis of a clinician's perception of the person and their either self-reported or observable behavior. But despite its randomness, the practice of psychiatric diagnosing holds a massive amount of legal and social power. Kerstin Kemke, a German survivor of 3 years forced detention at the age of 17 and insulin shock treatment, writes, "The diagnosis is the power tool of psychiatry. It suddenly changes everything. Diagnosis is the crime that deprives me of my freedoms caringly, preventively, and for my own good, of course. Without a diagnosis, nobody would be allowed to do that to me. It would be deprivation of liberty, bodily injury, and attempted murder. With the diagnosis of schizophrenia or endogenous depression, it is a medical treatment." It is true that not all diagnoses elicit forced treatment, and that some people find their diagnosis and psychiatric drugs helpful. However, it has been established that the diagnoses that carry the most power to coerce disproportionately land on multiply oppressed people. This brings us to the topic of the political organizing of those who have been on the receiving end on mental health services and the ability of our movements to embrace difference and understand complexities and overcome what Audre Lorde famously named single-issue politics. Our movements are diverse. They use different terms and emerge at different points in time and in different historical, political, economic, and cultural contexts. In my view, the biggest achievement so far is the adoption of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007. This could not have come about without our alliance with broader disability movements and strong international cooperation. This unique and powerful legal instrument prohibits forced treatment on the grounds of impairment or perceived impairment. But its implementation is a different story. Even aside from explicit calls by the powerful psychiatric lobby to exclude the mentally ill from the CRPD provisions, the kind of comprehensive social transformation envisioned in the CRPD is not just a matter of legislation. What is needed is a whole different social approach to madness and distress. So I wish to close with a few words about the importance of knowledge making on this topic, including the questions of access to official knowledge production and epistemic agency. From the onset of psychiatry, those of us considered to be of unsound mind have not only generated and articulated our knowledge, but have also documented it in various formats. Besides different oral traditions, the written sources include numerous biographical accounts and collections of essays, petitions, position papers, research reports, concepts of support, and theoretical contributions. One selection of sources assembled by the Opal Project from the US starts with a document from 1620. However, similarly to our individual experiences, this considerable body of knowledge is subject to epistemic oppression and epistemic violence. Maria Lieggio analyzes first-person ways of knowing in a psychiatric context and defines epistemic violence as a very denial of a person's legitimacy as a knower, their knowledge and their ways of knowing, that renders that person out of existence, unable to be heard and to have their interests count. Here I will also quote Christy Dodson, who focuses on governance coloniality in social science more broadly, and describes epistemic oppression as persistent epistemic exclusion that hinders one's contribution to knowledge production. There is increasing recognition of the fact that first-person perspectives are historically missing from the official knowledge base on madness and distress. The concept of epistemic injustice is now being discussed in the context of mental health. There is, however, much more eagerness to explore our testimonies through the biomedical lens, and even to partner with so-called lived experience experts within clinical research, than to rethink and abolish psychiatric practices that enable epistemic injustice in the first place. In my 20 years of engaging as a researcher in differently defined collaborative projects with clinical academics, I have noted that we are, at most, welcome to help create better quality knowledge about us and about the treatments we supposedly need, but are rarely in the position to explore and advance our existing collective knowledge base on its own merits, let alone make theoretical contributions. When our knowledge is considered at all, it is not being seen in its distinctiveness. Rather, it is automatically being adapted to the psychiatric context and employed to improve treatment. This re-psychiatrization of first-person labor, both individual and collective, radically diminishes its potential and suppresses our agency as knowers. It feels like an unwanted marriage that the society has arranged for us, comfortably believing that those deemed mad naturally belong together with those in charge of their treatment. I think it is time to break free from that imposed bond, which distorts and depoliticizes crucial aspects of those things we know together, which reach beyond psychiatry and encompass relevant and valuable understandings of the world we live in. It's time to seek bonds with other liberation movements and learn from their scholarship. I will end by quoting my Canadian survivor friend, Iris Shimrat, who generously helped me with the English in this presentation, and who dreams of a society brave and moral enough to eschew the whole paradigm on mental health and illness, replacing it with the creation of real community and real help. I hope that this conference, as a shared space for thinking and knowledge-making, can move us in that direction. I'm grateful for the opportunity to take part in it.
Thank you, Jasna. We will go back to questions later, but you definitely opened a lot of important topics that, we'll be wondering during the next 2 days. I would like to now thank again Colin for being here and to introduce you. Colin King, a teacher, lecturer, researcher from the UK. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was 17, established as a mental health practitioner, commissioner, teacher, and Black survivor research activist, setting up the Whiteness and Race Equality Network for the legal imprisonment of Black men. I'm just inviting you now to give you a keynote and then looking forward to.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I can follow this. I find this very difficult. It feels like I'm in a modern film in front of an audience, live act. Before I start, has anybody here suffered from mental illness? Just put your hands in the air if you suffered from mental illness. Good. Okay. Anybody a psychiatrist here? Put your hands up. Go back to the back, please. Don't want you in the front. So, good. I'm from England, Brixton, so my humour may not translate, but I know that you lost to Japan. So I know there's a sense of depression in this country taking place. I'll give you my commiseration. Is that okay? I will be going through slides and just talking anecdotally, yeah? The picture you see up front are two black men who are symbolic of the message I want to refer to today. It's about the madness of the black body and how it is demonized and has been violated for 400 years and has been constructed as a mental disorder. And that's my experience. I came today and I was stopped at the airport and I was searched. I was the only black person searched. And I look around and I don't see another black man in this space at the moment. So these are really challenges for me to think about how we think about race and our whiteness. Because these two pictures, and it's really funny looking up above, one of them is Christopher Clunas, who killed a white person back in the 80s because his frustration of dealing in a white institutional society in Britain. The other one is Adelana Lunis, who was killed by white police officers. He was suffocated, killed on the street, and we now have a legislation called the Mental Health Uses of Forces Act, which means you can no longer violate the black body, the children's body, mental health. Really quite serious issues that have confronted us. I'm supposed to have a clicker, aren't I? But we've got to put this debate today in an historical context and understand where race emerges. And some of our eminent and most important philosophers and psychiatrists believed in eugenic theories. Henry Maudsley, who actually runs Maudsley Hospital in South London, where I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act, believed in the inferiority of race. And it has become a clinical way of how we assess and look at differences. This is really powerful situations. I'm really pleased that today we're doing something around decolonization. But I'm going to put on record something that's really important. Has anybody heard of the word deprimania? I know you have. Anybody else but they heard the word deprimania? Put your hands up. Oh, good. Okay. Well, deprimania is really important to the discussion because it's the first type of mental disorder discovered by somebody named Cartwright in 1851. It's not a mental disorder. It's a racialized construction of difference, which has been politicized through a slave system. The mental health system is a slave system. It's a criminalization. This is not mental health care. And I'm sorry if I'm upsetting you, but somebody that's been the recipient of that care, who has been administrating that care and actually had his son sectioned in February this year, this is not a mental health system. So if I feel passionate about that, I think it's really important that I put the historical context about this debate today. Because what I want to do is position these people. These are the people of madness. This is where the disorder starts. These are the individuals, our philosophers, our Eurocentric people who actually propagate ideas of differences, which we celebrate in our really marginalized system, our DSM, our ICD-10. Yeah? These diagnostic things, they're value-based ideological framework that demonizes race. They are very, very dangerous, and these people are extremely dangerous in terms of what they've done historically, in terms of how I'm positioned today, talking about race. I find this really painful, so to stop me from crying, I have to talk in the second person. Because the first person is that what people want to hear from me. The first person is the social capital of having a mental disorder. It gives me access to a particular social world that's quite dangerous. My history is a section at 17, something called, I was given a diagnosis of bipolar. I've had schizophrenia for the last 40 years. They've asked me, do I want to downgrade? It's like asking for a phone. You know, you go to iPhone, can you get an iPhone 14? I said, no, I'm okay with schizophrenia, yeah? But schizophrenia was my diagnosis. I was in a hospital called Maudsley in South London. I was restrained, I was violated, overtly medicated, systematically for a number of periods of time. But the most pitiful realization, when I became a mental health practitioner, I actually rehearsed all the bad practices about myself. I sectioned black men that shouldn't have been sectioned. I put them in mental hospitals, they shouldn't be in there. I saw people lose their lives, take their lives. So that was quite difficult. The mental health system is a modern form of deprimania. In 2022, we should not be locking anybody up in the mental health system. We should be not ever stigmatizing, demonizing, and sectioning people. This is archaic, what we do to our people in society across the world, particularly in terms of people around race, sexuality, disability. This is a really serious issue that faces us here today. Because this is a picture of somebody you may not have heard of, Chris Cabal, who was executed by the police in Streatham this year. And if you do an analysis of all the systematic interventions legally, policy, and practice-wise, none of them have reduced mental health diagnosis and detentions. So that picture above, you can all see it, is a picture of where mental health started in 1651 and where we are now in 2022. And we have safeguards, the human rights legislation, the modern slavery legislation. We have all these safeguards, but for some particular reason, we continue to lock at disproportionate rates particular communities in our mental health system. So I'm particularly concerned about why this is actually happening, and this why this conference today is really important. So let me give you some data, okay? If I was you, I would be 4 times less likely as a white person. So I reversed the data. I don't talk about black people, I talk about whiteness. Because there's something about whiteness in our mental health system that we need to understand. Because if we keep on saying black people are 4 times more likely, black people become demonized as having a mental disorder. If we reverse the narrative and say, why are white people 4 times less likely? It tells us about something about our preferential, our implicit value base, and the way we respond to differences. We have a system, as mentioned, where if you're white, you're 11 times less likely to be put on something called a community treatment order, which means you're allowed to go home, but you've got to take your medication. More seriously than that, if you're white, you're 9 times less likely to be restrained, forcibly given medication, and being placed on a section of the Mental Health Act. So it's a room of white people. I've got to convey this message very strongly. There's a responsibility for everybody, particularly white practitioners, to join this fight when we see our brothers and sisters being abused in the mental health system. Because race is not just about black people, it's about all of us in this room. And so if I say that strongly, I'm going to advocate why this is happening. Mental health is a neoliberal business. It's a commercial enterprise. The body is the capital which we buy. These are the 3 new slave owners that we use. They are Sir Simon Wesley, which you may not have heard of, Tim Kendall. These are the people who are pumping a huge amount of economic character to invest in new mental health mad systems, rather than investing in community resources. This system is barbaric and archaic and dangerous. And these individuals need to be challenged ideologically and politically about how they maintain these economic systems. But one of the things I've got to say, there's something problematic about our training. I know we've got social workers here. Who's a social worker here? I know who's, yeah, there we go. We've got loads of social workers. I could get section here today, couldn't I? Better get out there and back. Our training does not reflect the lived experience of the people we work with. Our training reflects your lived experience of how you diagnose difference. And some research, this is by our Royal College of Psychiatry in British Society, that shows that half the people here don't even know who Frantz Fanon is. So let me ask you now, put your hands up. Have you heard of Frantz Fanon? You lying suds. Well, that's very good. I'm really pleased. I think I'll move to Germany. It seems safer. When we ask this question to people in Britain, most of the psychiatrists have never heard of Frantz Fanon. So they're only trained to work with white people. They're not trained to work in diversity. The literature, the values, the way of practicing are not geared to diversity. Actually, psychiatry is a modern form of uncivil intervention as a narrative. It's not a practice. It's a demonization of the other. Not only this needs to be decolonized, it needs to be deconstructed and destroyed. And we need a lived experience epistemology. We cannot go forward unless we have a lived experience epistemology. Psychiatry is dead. I'm sorry if you're a psychiatrist, but I'm going to be radical and to the point. You need to actually work in a completely different way to the people that you're working with. Just
They look at me, they don't see Colin, they don't see me as an individual and an identity with a specific history. They see a catalogue of black men who come off this stereotype of being big and dangerous and angry, and that's equated to people who then are outside their cultural understanding. And the Mental Health Act reproduces that legally in terms of how it looks at black people. It reproduces that culturally in terms of the stereotypes it makes about black people's lives, their families, their patterns, their cultures.
Okay, I just want to stop there because this is the film. I'm often asked to make films about being black and mad. It's really disorientating and quite disturbing. I want to make a film about something called cultural schizophrenia. This is a concept developed by Littlewood and Lipsil. That the very thing we're looking at, we're out of reality to the person we're talking to. We no longer see the person, we objectify the person. And this is a major problem in the issues of race and mental health and mental disorder. The mental disorder is the transactional relationship when a professional enters your life and has no idea about who you actually are and makes dangerous implications. I'm just going to listen to the second comment. This is by a white person talking about race.
They look at me, they don't see Colin.
Okay, I won't go into it, but this is Bill Forford. He looks at value-based practice. He looks at the values.
They look at me.
I'm getting quite popular, aren't I? So,
with Colin and this group is that, of course, that very reliability, right at the very heart of what we regard as best science, immediately excludes minority voices. And if the system is predominantly white, that means it immediately excludes black voices. Yeah? So the very reliability, it's not so much that, so if white supremacy actually is embodied in the very theoretical basis on which we're trying to change things. Now, I hasten to add, the reason why I hang in with this group and working with Colin despite my ignorance and continuing difficulty of understanding what it's all about is because I think what Colin's brought to this whole discussion is something really quite novel. It is about inside, outside, and it's captured for me in the phrase getting beyond the colour bar. And of course, it doesn't mean literally the colour bar. What it means is getting beyond a black-white standoff, Jewish, Aryan standoff, whatever those tribal standoffs.
Finish off my talk. I'm not sure how long I've got left. A few minutes, good. I want to finish it off by an invitation to everybody in the room to conduct a piece of emotional investigation about how we work together after the spaces today. Is that okay? Particularly when we work across divisions or perceived divisions that end up being madness as a mental disorder. We have set up something called the Whiteness and Race Equality Network because whiteness is the most threatening thing now about to talk about it, to openly see that we are white, but it doesn't mean it's punitive. And I just end this conversation today. This is somebody by the name of Ajibola Lewis, who lost her son in the first picture. Yeah. What Ajibola is now saying in this quotation is that we need to work together to investigate a new way of understanding race and race inequality. We need to work together to look at how we understand our bodies, the visions of our bodies, and the judgments we actually make. We need to look at how an Afrocentric diagnostic framework will give people equality, a voice in that framework. We actually need to challenge the way that race is now becoming an economic research approach. The biggest amount of research in British society is about black men. We are the most overrepresented, over-researched, less invested group in modern age. And it's dangerous and it needs to change. I'm positive from today and all the sessions I do that we can do it together. I am really positive, because the best coalitions are one of the civil rights movements when people came together across class and gender and race and really address race equality. If we do not do that, we're going to lose a generation of people into our mental health system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Jasna. It's hard to start with which question, really. There are more than one question buzzing in my head, but I will try to maybe address one, but you can tell me as well whether it's something that we can address it at all on one panel. But something you both spoke about quite a bit now, you, Colin, basically, also ended up in a way with part of the questions, but one big question for me is there a way out of the biomedical model? It's a huge question, and I would like to hear, you decide.
I would say definitely. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't find a way out of that model, and many people have found their way out. I mean, it's the question is there a way out of psychiatry once you, and I think there is a way out also, but it's a bit more difficult than from a model, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I would just say yes. Or there are many ways out. There are many ways out. But those are usually, I don't know, Colin, if you want to say, I think those are usually individual. Usually you get supported by people who are not paid or in charge to support you. You don't do it alone. I mean, I'm talking now my experience and what I've seen around me. Yeah, there is a way out, and it takes some support.
I'm going to cop this one. How many people here believe in the biomedical model? Can you just put your hands up? So there's a way out. We're starting with it today. That's a consensus, isn't it? That's a really strong starting point. It's not the what's way out. What do we replace it with? We replace it with lived experience epistemological framework, which is a new model that should be used to assess people from their own heritage, their own psychological perspective. Another way out of it is to actually dismantle mental health institutions and look at what proper mental health care is about. It's about investing in people's lives. Not when they get into hospital, it's too late. It starts with young people. It starts in the educational system. It starts in our employment system. It starts in our general framework about how we love and look after ourselves. Because if we don't do that, we will think that the biomedical model is the only savior. And it's religious orientated, and it's a theology that's very dangerous. So I think there is a way out. For me, I'm really concerned that 10 years' time, if we still got the same data, I'm really concerned about what's going on in this medical model that needs to be disruptive.
Thank you. In our preparation for this talk, also I like to somehow ask the questions to both of you, because the similar question, because it overlaps, even though the approaches were different, but they overlap quite a lot in the things that you were mentioning over the course of our conversations, but as well as during your presentations now. And I would like to hear more, and I also think it is part of the answers of how these models can be overcome, about the med studies, in which you're both quite even referring to, but also, Jasna, you have also done a lot of work in this field. So I would like to hear from both of you still. How do you see this knowledge making, and this particular knowledge making coming from, the side of those with experience, but not necessarily as far as I know. So yeah, I would also like to know, to hear from you more about the med studies, how they came to be, but also how do you see the med studies as maybe a potential also for overcoming certain societal issues that were already addressed in your presentations. You can also decide who takes the...
I'm not an advocate of med studies, sorry. I found it very difficult to get my head around something that had racialized me. So I think you've got to have your own interpretation of what madness is and what studies of madness are. I think the way you did it this morning was brilliant. I think it's about what the madness in what we do affects our lives that needs to be analysed. For me, med studies put on the agenda the whole issue of race that I talked about quite a lot. But I think it gives us a real understanding that if you look at, in our country, we have something called the long-term plan, and it states quite clearly, statutory, that madness or lived experience should have parity with clinical experiences. And unless that happens, med studies will not have the authority, the assertiveness, and the impact. Impact's really important. That the life of a lived experience person should be just as important as a clinician who has studied for 12 years becoming a doctor. That model, that life aspiration should be regarded as sacred. It should be part of their studies. It should be part of their competencies. If it's not, then there is a madness in the way we are still operating. I'm really concerned that med studies is being used as a very inclusive, white-centric, Eurocentric term. That's the property of Europeans. It needs to be globalized across the world, so it's accessing everybody to have the opportunity. Lastly, to challenge and change and politicize our opposition to current mental health practices.
Okay, I am an advocate of med studies. Even though I see lots of danger. I mean, med studies will not come with a comprehensive solution to many of the things we talked about. I don't see it as a field yet. It's in the making. I don't think we live in a world where knowledge matters so much, and that includes med studies knowledge also, if you like. I mean, there are other interests involved. So knowledge is one thing, and I think it's already, there's so much evidence of the damage of the biomedical model. This is not the question of that there is no knowledge there of that. There is knowledge, there is evidence, and still that model rules and is being exported, is going global, etc. So the reality is not about knowledge, but you need to start somewhere. And I think everybody chooses their priorities. We all have one life only and need to choose what we are going to do. I'm talking about myself now. If you want to have a say in official knowledge production in this field, you don't have much choice. You join those who are in power, or they invite you and you join, and then you start to try to work together. To me, med studies is a possibility to get out of those scenarios, not to work in this compulsory partnership with clinical academics. I don't mean concrete persons, but like that whole institution of knowledge making. Med studies give us a possibility to start elsewhere, and to not to start from madness, but to start from where we are. I don't know if I'm making sense. What I wanted to say is, as soon as you don't think about madness or mental illness, but you think about how we live, what kind of reality we have, all other questions opens. So I think, to me, med study is a place, if you like, is a space to open up all that is now not being opened up and is being covered by one model, one way of thinking. I said something little about our movement. I'm in the movement of psychiatrists, people that I spent the most years in is the European Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. I'm very critical to our movement, and I see in med studies this possibility to continue on a different level and to to sit and think a bit more. The political activism doesn't allow you for that often. So with med studies, we have the possibility to think about our differences, to rethink everything, what connects us, and to start researching and theorizing all other things but madness. Not madness, but there's a nice metaphor by Lucy Costa from Canada who said med studies is about flipping the microscope. You don't microscope madness and mad people, but you turn it everywhere. So I do see a potential there. As any other development, of course, it is in danger of being academized, of being co-opted, of becoming another small specialized disciplines that will make certain careers that will be white and end up somewhere in academy, like it is the case with some feminist studies and gender studies, etc. So, but I think it's up to us who are engaging in that field to make it different. You can only try.
Yeah, we are trying. I would just, before I open the floor to the audience, maybe ask one question which is more like biographical, let's say, to the both of you. Because one of the aspects of, producing knowledge, facing all the facts, and also both your work, I see quite as activist, is also emancipatory and empowering, and it giving voice still to things that we usually don't read in official media or elsewhere. So I just want to know what empowered you maybe the most in your work, or what was your inspiration or motivator to do what you do.
On the ward, been told what to do. I suppose painfully, I often think I would like to die before I get killed by the police and the mental health system. I think you may find that's quite crazy, because I think a lot of our people in our generation feel that we're going to get killed. We've lost a lot of people over the years. What's inspired me is actually living through 4 mental health assessments, seeing my son's section, my son's section. He's now doing a psychology degree, so I'm really worried about what happened to him. He sounds like he's really sold out. So I must have done something seriously wrong in his life that he's now becoming a psychologist. What inspires me, do you know the fact that somebody may be able to escape death, violation and murder? You may say I'm being very emotive. I think what really inspires me, that I get asked to come to these conferences. I have a voice. I think I have a responsibility for people who are not able to use their voices. I think I have a responsibility. I've been trying to write this book called They Diagnosed Me as Schizophrenic When I Was Really a Gemini. And yeah, it's quite funny, isn't it? Do you get it? Yeah. Oh, it translates in Germany. Good. I was getting really worried about that joke. And I've been trying to write this book for ages. And I really want to write. I've been told I can't write. I've been told I'm dyslexic. And every time they tell me I've done my master's, I've done my PhD, I've done all sorts of things to support people. I think what inspires me is people. I think what really inspires me to do what I do is that I know I can leave a legacy behind. And I often say to all my people that I meet with is right, because we reference people who have no relationship to our life experiences. And we've done a lot of work with the Lancet. People are now writing articles, writing books. I don't want to reference Freud. I don't want to reference all these people again. I think they're a complete waste of time. They have nothing to do with my world, my heritage, and who I am. I want to listen to black experiences. I want to listen to black women's experiences. I want to listen to our world. I want to listen to transcultural experiences, how we work together. I think what has inspired me lastly before I go on is that I think there's a real opportunity to work with psychiatry. I've done a lot of work with psychiatrists, and I've got to say, we've got to acknowledge they're human beings, and they may not want to like to hear that, and they work in very difficult circumstances, and I think we have to work across those professional lines. What inspired me is that I've got a contract tonight, so I'm getting paid, so I've got to say economics as well. Is that okay? Yeah, that's me.
Hi, thank you very much for very important and very interesting talks. I have a question concerning psychoanalysis actually. What's your take on psychoanalysis? Because there was this critique on Freud, and I would think that the tradition of psychoanalysis could be a sort of ally against pathologization or a purely organic understanding of mental illness. And I think Fanon himself was, I think, in a sort of tradition coming from psychoanalysis and more specifically from the French institutional psychotherapy. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more on this and what's your take on psychoanalysis or your critique on psychoanalysis. But thanks again.
I think it's a great question, but I think there's a complete difference between Fanon and Freud. I think Fanon contextualized the post-colonial experiences that impinge upon the reality of people who are a minority. He also looked at something that's quite painful, the black skin, white mask. I'm not sure that was, I think, the most important part of the book, about the superiority of whiteness and the demonization of blackness. I also think what he tries to do is politicize psychotherapists, to understand it within a political context, rather than CBT, who actually condition you that it's your fault and there's no alliance to the world in which you work with, which I think is the most dangerous part of psychology and psychiatry. I also think he looks at political and economic symptoms of cultural differences, which we come nowhere near to. And lastly, I think what he tries to do is go back to community-based practice. No one should be in a mental health hospital. You should be in your community. You should be in your home and supported by that as well. Fanon's a genius to me. The postmodernist psychotherapists and psychiatrists don't come anywhere near him at all. And I've worked with them when I've sectioned people and I've assessed people. I've seen the fear in their face when everything's based upon a diagnostic framework in which they detach themselves and put their values to the side and think they're being actually assessing someone with fairness and equality. There's no fairness, equality, or decency in being assessed under the Mental Health Act. I'm not sure if anybody's experienced that. It's the worst moralizing experience. I've had it done 4 times over. Yeah. And in our country now, we've got to the point now, we have to train our white psychiatrists to become culturally capable. We've got things called advanced choice documents, so you can make decisions about how to stop people abusing you. We have a legal mental health system. It's based upon injustice and inequality. So I think your question is fundamental, but also how are people reading Fanon is really crucial for me. How they can conceptualizing it and how they're using it in their practice. Because Fanon can be used to any minority or oppressive group to understand why one is superior and one is inferior. One is demonized and one is not. One gets section, one does another. So I think it's a fantastic question. But remember, there are so many other black theorists that people have never heard about. And it's not part of our curriculum. There are lots of women theorists that we don't hear about in mental health. There's a lot of people from the gay and lesbian, plus society, transgender. We don't hear about those theories. So I think Fanon is the person who's the poster person of actually promoting real equality in concepts and theories and activate them in justice. Because you've got to have theories that lead to challenging injustice in the mental health system.
You ask about Freud and psychoanalysis. This is what I understood. That was the part of the question also, I think. Yeah, it was. I don't like any of that, I have to say. I think I had to study loads of psychoanalysis in my psychology studies. I didn't find, I mean, it individualizes everything. I mean, it has a place in, you know, general, I don't know. But I don't think that, I don't connect psychoanalysis to any kind of solution. There's one, I don't know if I should say this here, but there's one thing that I like about Freud, that he was giving good quality drugs to his patients. That's what I appreciate, but not more than that.
Okay, that exhausts the question, at least for now. Do we have another question from the audience here? I see 2 hands.
Hello, and first of all, thank you so much for the contributions and to actually giving like this topics of justice in the mental health sector such a space. And my name is Kim Vichera. I'm working in the Weglerhaus, which is like basically, I would say like one of the called alternatives to psychiatry in Germany. Like this year, the Council of Europe was publishing a compendium of best practice in Europe, and especially asking the questions, how can people be supported without coercion? And only like 2 projects in Germany were actually called as best practice without coercion, and one of them is the Weglerhaus. So it's kind of like honoring, but at the same time it's like quite sad to see, like, as a project which is existing since 1996, that's still one of the 2 only institutions in Germany which works without coercion. So I guess my question is if, like, questions of madness and also like fighting for justice and for people which experience violence in the system of psychiatry, if it's something that actually gets like such beautiful now spaces, and the subject is also discussed now much more in academia, if you kind of like see the danger of like losing the touch to where we all like, where it actually started with like the activist work, and also like this kind of like, as we know, psychiatry is not a beautiful place. It's like, it's dirty, it's like leaky, it shows like a lot of violence. And when I just like arrived here to space, I was wondering, because I met a person which is a member of the first.
Can I please
I would just
ask?
finish in with 2 sentences, which actually was one of the first and the only user and survivor groups in Germany, the association, which is actually called like the Mad Offensive. And he was like asked by the organizers of this conference to leave and was guided with the security out of the building, and then even in front in the space of the Tatiana was asked to leave the space. And as we know, psychiatry is also a question of like space, who has access to which space. How does this demand of this conference align with this kind of questions, and at the same time is like forcing activists who are working this in the space actually going to close wards, giving people like access to lawyers and helping them to leave psychiatric wards if you're losing touch to this reality.
Can I please ask to focus on the question? We really have 10 more minutes for the panel.
Yeah, I guess this was the question.
Because there were a lot of things mentioned, so can we just repeat the question?
Question if we have like this subjects of justice and madness, justice like in psychiatric systems, if it's getting more and more like to academia, to like, for example, a lot in the last years it was subjects in artistic spaces, if we lose the touch to the reality of actually the people who are like still sitting in the closed wards and like don't have access to spaces like this and don't get their voices being heard.
Can we solve these big issues with words? I guess. I mean, we don't. Yeah.
Okay, if I understand you, Kim, correctly, I mean, I'm coming now to the example of the person who was, I don't know what happened, but I know the person. I want to say that being, being psychiatrist or being an activist doesn't mean that you should have access to all spaces if you don't behave. I need to say this. I mean, I'm talking about the man who, I don't know what happened, but he approached me, I know him, and I think this is difficult. I better shouldn't try in answering this. The other part of your question, if these things are going to academia, yes, they are. Everything goes to academia because academia takes everything and needs to, reproduce itself. So I think there are still things that we can do about it. I mean, I will continue my work whether med studies becomes academized or not. I mean, you work despite the developments that you not necessarily like. For me, this is not the reason to abandon. That's one part of the question. And the other one, I understood you, if somebody is an activist or I don't know what, they shouldn't be denied access to... I don't see the connection between two things, if I'm honest. These are two separate things for me. And I don't know if other people can follow who don't know what happened.
Oh, sorry, I'm not completely aware, but also if it's not a problem, I would like to just, because we are almost wrapping up the discussion. If you would like to, Colin.
No, I think it's a civil liberty. No psychiatrist should be given the power to ever restrain anybody anywhere in the mental health institution. They not should be given the power. I think that's the question you were actually saying. And also, what spaces are people being restrained in, and the reason behind it is quite important as well. So in England, we do have a legislation called the Mental Health Use of Forces Act, where it's illegal now to restrain people in mental health spaces. But as some said earlier on, the major issue about spaces is that black men are 10 times more likely to be restrained than any other community. And it really shocks me why white practitioners and doctors and practitioners are not standing up and taking legal and civil action about the abuse of people right in front of their eyes. This is a serious indictment that people have seen this happen, and we've lost people who have died to the system. That's me about the spaces. And I also think mental health is a form of cultural restraint as well. People are denied their heritage, the ability to be who they are, religiously, ideologically and politically as well. I take this very seriously now because it's a thing I'm moving in England, that we need to snap together. No one should be chemically restrained. No one should be physically restrained. It's abhorrent. In 2022, we're still doing these things. But we're doing it in these hidden spaces where people should not be abused like that. So I'm going to politicize what you said. This is the biggest injustice that faces in our mental health system, and it needs to be challenged.
Sorry, I just heard that we have a pile of questions from the online chat. So maybe we take 1, 2 from there, and then I will try to moderate, but we are almost, breaching our time.
And
sorry,
people?
Sorry. Yeah, now
So we have many questions from the online. I will pick maybe one for Jasna, one for Colin. The first question is, I've been told over and over that diagnosis is just a word and it shouldn't be part of your identity. I wonder if those are tools of the status quo to keep us from politically organizing around that. So just know if you want to comment on that. And for Colin, I agree with you that psychiatry should be abolished. How do you answer people who say, psychiatry saved my life? And have you know any racialized people who have said that? And to comment on that, if we get rid of psychiatry and mental health system, what do we replace them with?
Well, they sound like PhD questions. Don't know how long I'm going to get through this. And it's only about 3 minutes left. I didn't quite understand the first question, but let me respond to, I think it was about diagnosis. Was it about diagnosis?
Yeah, about diagnosis being part of everyone's identity and life.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to get rid of diagnosis and come up with something about. The mental health system is about treatment and control. It's not about care. And if you look at the legislation, it's about looking for mental disorder. That's criminalizing people before you've even met them, and that becomes racialized. So that needs to radically change. You know, you can't have a mental health system that predetermines that we're looking for a mental disorder. That's the central part of any legislation. That's the control. Right, getting rid of psychiatry or psychiatrists is actually trying to give more power to people with lived experience in that interaction relationships about how we make decisions. You know, so it's taken away. So it's maybe not dismantling, but taking the power away, taking away the omnipotence of the psychiatrist as this religious person who's making these sacred decisions without giving power back to the lived experience. That needs to happen. We are so scared of doing it, and being accountable to people with lived experience is crucial as well. The last question, the last one was
about psychiatry to being abolished.
Oh, let's give it to the audience. Who thinks psychiatry should be abolished? Put your hands up. Come on, put your hands up properly. Come on. You're getting paid tonight. Put your hands up. Put your hands up. There we go. That's the answer. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Can I comment on that also? Because part of the questions, I mean, this question, what should it be replaced with? It was already answered by more clever people than I, for example, by Jeffrey Mason. I'll spare you information who that is, but he said, what is alternative to apartheid? Some other people said, what is alternative to rape? What do we replace it with? With nothing, you just abolish it. And then something else will happen, something better. You don't replace it. So I think it's a wrong question. What are we going to have instead? We don't know what are we going to have instead. We are going to turn back to our communities, I guess, and very different ways of communicating and treating each other. So I'm not scared that there will be a huge void if the system gets abolished. I don't think that will happen. And the other questions Colin answered already about the diagnosis.
Okay, I'll take two more questions, one from the audience and one from the, factual audience here, physical audience, and one from the chat. So one was going here in the second row.
Hello. Thank you also again. Colin, you have mentioned the connection between religion and, if I got that correctly, the constitution and the definition of psychiatric diseases and like mental illness. At the same time, I would say that religion is a space that is transcendent, and it is working with the mental states of people, you know. So that are maybe not particularly connected to the reality that we can perceive scientifically, because we believe in things when we are religious, for example. So I was wondering, how do you see this connection between, I actually asked my question to sum it up. How is religion part of constructing mental illness when it is also like a practice of alternative mental states?
We had a huge discussion last week with our black service users about the role of religion in their society. And I think, for me, there was a big issue around religion and Christianity and faith. And I think about how, I like Foucault's work on the history of civilization and religion, about the archaeology of knowledge and how it's produced. What I'm trying to do is, similar to Med Studies, is reconceptualize how religion has given a sort of a theological status to mental health through the use of practitioners. So the symptoms almost become the scripts, and the realities about how we look at the world, similar to religion. And I think in religion, a good religious person can adapt the scripts and the values and politicize them. But often they don't. And I think a consultant psychiatrist, if they're really good, they can politicize their role as advocates to liberate people from the mental health systems when they're being criminalized, but they don't. And I think that's the huge connection I see. I'm going to challenge you on science because I'm not quite sure what you mean by science. And science sometimes is a miscalculated beliefs to reinforce a reality that's not real to everyone. You know, there's a major problem with the ethics of science and research. How we do research is often contemporary, you know, funded by economic bodies to produce knowledge, to reinforce a particular perspective on the way we see mental health in society. This is very similar to, I think, religion. These are my perspectives. I'm really pleased that you've opened up that discussion about religion as well. But I think there's a real big difference between religion and faith and Christianity, and we've got to break them down and actually say what is the impact when we apply religious thoughts and values to mental health, but can we actually use it much more effectively to politicize the role of religion and faith to liberate people from how they're being pressed through the mental health system. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but it's just a kind of range of perspectives.
And last, very short question from the online audience.
So what are the questions we need to be asking as survivor researchers?
You can take this one.
I mean, I can't answer this. I can't suggest any questions that we are to be asking as survivors. I mean, this is too difficult. I mean, it depends on the, you know, you have different projects. You can ask 1 up to 3 questions in one project. I have no idea what this, I mean, I don't think we are different kind of people as survivor researchers. There are many things that I could think of and say. I can't answer that.
Perfectly.
And they say we're going to stop thinking ourselves as survivor researchers. Because it's a form of cultural entrapment. When you start thinking of yourself as a survivor researcher, then you become a reductionist. That's your only value. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm a black researcher. That's all I am. Do you know what I'm saying? So you've got to start giving ourselves power back, because we lose our legitimacy if we're just kind of like, and it goes to this polarization that you're not quite civil or you're not quite intellectual enough to be a researcher. But also, survivor research is surviving all the crap research that's been done on us. So I'm really concerned about survivor research. And also, it leads to the exploitation of survivor researchers in mental health practice. We have a thing called the PPP system, and you get £70 an hour, and somebody else is getting £500 an hour for the same skills best. So I think we need to actually dismantle that, similar to my quest to dismantle psychiatry. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'm really sorry that
really hard session. I'm knackered. Don't ask me no more questions. Is that okay? I want to go home. Thank you.
Okay, we can do it in the break. I propose that. Otherwise, we will never reach the second panel. And before that...
This is worse than the mental health assessment. What are you guys doing?
And before that, I would propose a little break now, and then see you all in nada. How many minutes? Around 20 minutes. But yeah, we're starting at 7 again. Thank you so much for being with us, online and offline.